Welcome back, everyone. I hope you had fun playing trivia. I can't wait to see who's the winner. But we've got to get on with our panels. We've got a jam-packed day. I am thrilled to welcome our next panel, compliance frameworks, making them work for the greater good. This is no boring subject. Compliance and risk management and security all go together hand in hand. We're having a great moderator from Microsoft, Mandana Jabari, and Arlette Hart, who is a Uniting Women in Cyber veteran. This is her fourth year with us, with her company from Leidos. And Ashley Taylor from Troutman Sanders, who's a partner in privacy and security and incident response, with lots of incident response war stories and how that turns into compliance. So please welcome our speakers to the stage. And without that, I missed one speaker. I apologize. Kushpidoshi from Accenture Federal Services, which is a very important piece of where we are with the public-private partnership on compliance. So I welcome all of you to stage and thank you very much.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Mary Beth. First of all, before we start and before I even introduce myself and ask our panelists to introduce themselves and cover what they do around compliance for our customers, I would just want to say I love what United Women in Cyber does. I want to thank all of you for organizing this event. The first time I was part of the event was 2 years ago in person. And not only I met a lot of women and men that they have the same goal as all of us to really promote diversity and inclusion in the industry, but also I met one of the most talented women in the industry, which I hired, and she's part of my team. So as we know, the talent shortage in the industry is real. So use this event to meet people. They're somewhere here listening, and to meet people, to hire them, to bring them part of your team. I had a really good experience actually meeting very talented and diverse candidates as part of this event that I attended 2 years ago. So with that, just quickly introduce myself, Mandana Jabari. As Mary mentioned, I'm running Microsoft security, compliance, and identity business development globally. And the reason my role even exists is because we know it's not just about tools and technology. You can't really just buy a tool and say, okay, I'm secure or I'm compliant. So you really need to have the right people, the right processes, the right partners that they can actually help our customers. So for example, I work very closely with Accenture, with Leidos, with the rest of our partner portfolio, because especially for compliance, there's so many other components other than technology is involved that we need to pay attention to help our customers. So just a background, I was born and raised in Iran, moved here 20 years ago, always been in startup, in network security, network performance, and I have an electrical engineering background with an MBA. So for me, transition to security from networking was pretty obvious. I've been in the industry for, I would say, 20 years. Microsoft was my first large company experience, and I love it. And I think it's a great place to be if you're in security or compliance at this point. And as I said, compliance is way more than what just we do. And this panel is perfect because everybody comes from a different point of view, different background, and a different way of helping our customers to become compliant. So I would love to introduce our panelists and ask them to quickly tell us a little bit about themselves, how they got into cybersecurity and also compliance, and how they're helping customers in which part of the compliance today. So maybe I'll start with you, Arlette.
Oh, thank you. By the way, I remember 2 years ago at the Uniting Women in Cyber conference, I remember you there because you had the most amazing suit ever, which,
Thank you.
Great. So my name's Arlette Hart. I am at Leidos. I've been here for 3 years, and I'm a cybersecurity solution architect and our master solution architect and senior technologist kind of person, which is really odd because My undergrad degree was in history and political science, and my graduate degree was in American government. So naturally, I fit right into the cyber world, right? I kind of went here sideways from a whole bunch of different work. I started in IT a long time ago. And then at one point, just kind of in the progression of things, I ended up in a cybersecurity role at the FBI um, on a contract. And it was like, okay, well, do a random contract. Things happened in the way that things happen in cybersecurity. And then I got much deeper into cybersecurity and ended up as the CISO at the FBI before I came to Leidos. So kind of, obviously it seemed like a good fit at that time. So, and I think it still is. And I was primarily on the operations side, but the more I was on the operations side of this, the more I realized that without compliance, you really are not operational in the first place. So the two just are hand in hand, no matter what you do. And I'm really excited to have this conversation because the challenges of compliance are innumerable, and the challenge of security is also innumerable. But I'm really excited to be on this panel. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Arlette. Ashley.
Thank you. My name is Ashley Taylor, and I'm a partner with Troutman Pepper. And I've started my career as a very traditional commercial litigator. I then served as Deputy Attorney General for 4 years and joined this firm in 2001. Shortly after joining the firm, I received my first significant engagement in this space. It involved representation of ChoicePoint. You all may remember that data incident. So I represented ChoicePoint specifically with respect to the state AG action. And that case and matter really put me and our team on the map, and we've handled a number of significant incidents since that time. I'm thrilled to be on this panel because I come to this through the enforcement portal. So I work closely with many companies and their compliance departments, but it's post-incident. It is demonstrating that we are enhancing our compliance regimes, demonstrating that we have responded appropriately to the incident. And something we'll talk about that folks on this webinar will know is that after an incident, the resolution usually involves some type of audit, some type of report. And so we work closely with the compliance offices, usually for a couple of years post-incident. So I'm able to gain a unique perspective since I come after the fact, and I am helping companies anticipate the holes that regulators will claim existed in the compliance protocols and fashioning arguments to demonstrate that those were not indeed holes. So thank you for welcoming me to both this panel and this event. It's my first time here, so thank you all.
Thank you so much, Ashley. And last but definitely not least, Khushbu.
Thank you so much for having me today. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kushpidoshi. I work for Accenture Federal Services. I'm a cyber managing director, and I'm also the cyber strategy and risk lead across all of federal agencies that Accenture actually works with day in, day out. So just a brief background about myself. I've been working for 20 plus years, living and breathing IT and cybersecurity. Started off my career doing kind of similar to Mandana, doing network security, telecom security as well. And then I transitioned, took that technical side of the house knowledge and applied it more to the regulatory compliance frameworks aspect as well. So pretty solid on that end. I also have my MBA in information security as well. And so one of the other things outside of my other degrees that I have a whole lot of cybersecurity certifications. One thing I would like to add, though, I have experience working with various C-level executives as well, implementing cybersecurity programs. But at the same time, as most of our federal clients talk about the risk management framework or the cybersecurity framework, my teams and I, we actually have experience when it comes to ISO work, ISI work, vulnerability management, so on and so forth. So live and breathe that work every day. I'm known as also the RMF It Girl. So have had a wonderful opportunity working across different aspects of the compliance facet as well. But what I'm super excited to be here, or not only, first of all, thank you for inviting me, but to discuss with this panel today is, how is compliance really being looked at? Is it just a checkbox exercise, or are we truly thinking about security and including overlaying the compliance portion as part of it? So again, thank you so much for having me, and look forward to this discussion.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Impressive panel. So, what I want to cover here is, we know compliance and security is ongoing. It's not something that you can just do it once and say, okay, now I'm safe, I'm secure, I'm compliant. And with compliance, I would say it's even more critical and ongoing, because it's not just the bad actors trying to steal your data, and then you have to deal with it. And, for example, we know Ashley does post-incident work. It's also about the regulations changing constantly. So even if we say, okay, from the security perspective and data perspective, we are all safe, the regulation is changing constantly, and the customers have to really comply with all of these requirements and regulations. So I think we all agree that as security and compliance professionals, we have one common goal, and that's really to help secure and protect the most critical assets of our organization or our customers' organization, and that's really our data. And then you think about the fact that with the data doubling every 2 years, with over 300 million people working remotely right now, and also with these users accessing and storing data in new ways that they haven't done before, and it's outside of our traditional borders of business, really managing risk is essential, right? Over half, to be exact, 54.7% of organizations, they say they're worried about knowing where the data is. And I would actually go a step beyond that and say they even don't know what data they have to then know where the data resides, right? So really, without visibility and the tools to discover, classify, and govern business critical data, there is really this unknown level of risk that creates an unnecessary amount of uncertainty for our customers. And then, of course, the data is not static. Employees throughout the day and in the organizations, they're creating and sharing data every minute of every day. And without some level of automation and machine learning, it would be really difficult to know the risk of internal threats, for example, or policy violation. And then I mentioned this, keep track of the regulation is a really hard task, especially given that there are on average 220 daily updates from over 1,000 global regulatory agencies that the customers have to comply with on a daily basis. So what we can tell from our customer engagement is that the basic hygiene goes a long way, both for security and compliance. You will be surprised that some customers, they don't even have that. So my question to our panelists, and based on the different experiences they have, is what are really the 3 top minimum steps that you feel the customers need to take in order to say, okay, I'm at a place that I can say, I can really be okay with the risk, because there is a certain level of risk that you have to take anyway. So what are those steps that you recommend to our customers and to the audience here to take to say, okay, I have the minimum viable solution to be able to sleep at night and don't worry about compliance or stolen data, etc. I can, you can go, whoever wants to answer, but Khushbu, I see that like you want to say something. Go ahead.
Absolutely. There's different, as you said, there's different aspects to think about this, right? The risk-based approach, one of the aspects you think through is, okay, what is the risk to the system, or what is the risk to the organization we need to think through? So in working with a lot of our clients, they are moving with, this, sorry guys, calling out publications here, but important nonetheless, this 837 revision to the ongoing authorization model. Lots of federal agencies are actually truly trying to see, how do I implement the ongoing authorization piece, right? What are the critical, quote unquote, list of controls that I need to account for that will truly help me think through my risk posture? So that's one thing. I mean, I think we really need to help our clients get on that ongoing continuous authorization roadmap. But it's not even just putting that roadmap together. It's also understanding, what kind of change that needs to have happen from an organization standpoint. So you're not doing business the same way that you were doing for the last 20 plus years, 30 plus years, right? So what does it mean to the day-to-day practitioner, technology practitioner, security practitioners? How is all of that going to be embodied? And then, as we start talking about modernization, we have on-prem, cloud, whatever have you, right? What will it truly mean from that perspective? So we have to think about now if technology is changing 5, 10 years down the road, what is that going to look like? How is that going to affect compliance? So there has to be some forward leaning thinking from that perspective. So those would be my recommendations.
Great. Ashley,
I believe there also needs to be backward thinking. So the challenge, especially in the federal government, is that, well, actually, I think everywhere, everybody automated a long time ago. And so everybody ends up with a ton of legacy infrastructure as well as their forward-leading infrastructure. And they've got a bunch of people, or a lot of people, who are trying to get past where they were and into where they are. I think I agree with you that, knowing your data, knowing your assets, knowing your people. I mean, the whole concept of zero trust and driving to a zero trust framework certainly is, if we get there, when we get there, as we get there, and as we are enabling our clients to get there successfully, that really does check a lot of boxes for compliance and eliminates a lot of the risk, the residual risk. Well, can't eliminate all of it, but it eliminates a number of areas where you have significant challenges. Identity management, the greatest piece is you don't know who you have at any point in time. I mean, you know lots of pieces of it, but checking the box completely is one of the great challenges in cybersecurity, and actually in IT too. Like, did you really do it the way it needs to be done? And that's not even starting down the path of, how do we secure our operational technology questions? Because that's kind of a whole other little can of worms. So as we go through, what does it look like, to comply? Asset, the SANS piece, assets, person, and your data. And if you can categorize those and know where your important data is, your most important data is, you've gone a long way down that path.
Definitely. Ashley, I know that from the post-incident perspective, you definitely also have your own experience here. Would love to hear yours, please.
When I think about that question, I think about companies not appreciating the importance of separating the operational issues from the cultural issues and addressing both. Right? Technology changes quickly, so there's an operational issue when you say, "Are we compliant?" Right? That's an operational question. But there's a culture component as well. And the breakdown that I see is often on the cultural side as applied to the operational issues. So what do I mean by that? You have a very skilled operational person who works in an environment where culturally, how you started this segment, that is, it's an ever-evolving process. It's a movie. It's not a snapshot. But if your company doesn't think of security, privacy as a movie, it thinks of something that we've done it, now we can move on, or we can come back to it next year, rather than something that's ongoing. That operational piece will become static very soon. So the first part of the culture is to think of it as a movie and not as a snapshot. The other piece I would say is that it has to be, again, culturally cohesive. That is, over time, even if everyone is trying to do the right thing, people can become siloed in business units. People cannot have an appreciation as you are ingesting data, how that data migrates to different products. And everybody begins to think of their product in isolation without someone thinking of all of the products and how the data is ingested and is used to enhance various products. That level of thinking can get lost. And so you can have all the right answers in the operational context, but because you don't have a cohesive culture drawing it all together, you lose sight of one particular product and how the information and/or data is used. And the last question is, I would just enhance how you started this segment, and that is data hygiene. You need to know what data you have, and you need to know where it sits. And that's a question you should consistently ask. right? Again, from a what data do we have and where does it sit? Because that will change, right? And those cultural questions, I think, combined with the operational details, is really what will help company maintain its compliance status.
Great. This was great. Thank you so much, Ashley. And I loved your analogy about this. Think of it as a movie, not a snapshot. That's exactly what it is, both for security and compliance. So from the perspective of exactly what you said, understand where your data is, and discover the data, whether it's in the cloud, on premises, any of the file system, any other application that your customers might, your employees might have, which is not even a sanctioned application, for example, for your organization. Just knowing where the data is and then being able to automatically, as much as possible, classify and label this data and then protect the data throughout the life cycle of the data is critical. And then you start thinking about the risk management. Obviously, for example, not every insider threat is malicious. A lot of times people do things because they just don't know. They don't know better, so they make mistakes. So obviously, culturally and also education is very important. But also from our perspective, from a technology perspective, being able to identify and remediate critical risk within the organization, with building privacy controls, risk management that really enables our customers to use their native and third-party signals to identify, investigate, and remediate is also very important. And then at the end of the day, think of it from a compliance management perspective. Assess your compliance. You need to do that constantly because, as we talked about, there are regulations changing on a daily basis, right, to respond to these regulations. And then how can you really map the regulation and the requirements to global regulations that you need to comply with and take recommended action. So those are all the things that potentially technology can do. But Khushbu, actually, I have a question for you because I'm very familiar with, obviously, Accenture, one of our top partners around security compliance. We are actually working with you right now on taking a compliance manager as a service to market together to help our customers. Maybe walk us through this whole process you go through with your customers. Again, first, really assessing where they are, help them build the right strategy for security compliance, and then help them execute that strategy all the way to constant monitoring and adopting. What is your day-to-day, or what is the process you take your customer through to make sure they have an end-to-end really view to their compliance and security, not just visibility to a piece of it?
No, I think that's a wonderful question. So every client, I'll start off with saying this, every client need has been a little bit different. But if I had to take, so I'll provide two different viewpoints. One is if you're implementing a brand new system for a client, right? So one of the key things is what we've often seen is for folks who are familiar with the authority to operate or the assessment and authorization process, security or the compliance piece always gets thought of as the afterthought. So when you're thinking about your design, build, implement, whatever have you, people go through all those standpoints and then they're like, okay, well, I got to do all my compliance paperwork and I have to turn in my authorization package. So that's where, right now, especially when we're doing bigger security implementations or bigger implementations as a whole, not just security piece, we truly make sure that security is truly embedded and compliance embedded from the get-go. So whether it's part of your design build phase, your build phase, implement phase, so on and so forth. So we tackle it from that perspective. So we are working closely with our technical architecture teams. We're working with our cloud experts, what have you, to truly make sure compliance is ingrained in that entire process. So that's one example that I'll share. Now I'll take a different example here. So there are clients that we actually work with. They're like, okay, well, you know what? We have so many different compliance requirements we have to meet. So help us think through, I think Arlette, you were talking about zero trust, right? So what is, there are a lot of requirements, even with the executive order that came up. What does that truly mean? Whether it's FedRAMP compliance, whether it's how do I embrace zero trust, what is ongoing authorization, what have you. So we are truly sitting down with our C-suite And we're trying to understand what is the goal, where does the organization want to go, because there are traditional aspects from compliance that's still in place. We hear things like, okay, how do we restructure how RMF is or what have you. So we are actually working with most of the enterprise level, sitting down, understanding where do we need to go, what steps or what phases we need to work through, and then working with a number of pilot group or prototype or whatever have you, and see how we can actually implement it before we scale it out. So that would be my other part of compliance aspect that we actually work through from an end to end. So one is more from a system program perspective, one is more at the enterprise level.
Thank you so much, Kushbu. There is a very cool question from the audience that I'm gonna ask Ashley, and I love how it's framed, cyber as a movie. What advice would you give to small businesses maintaining a financial visibility while implementing the cyber as a movie mindset?
That is a very good question, and I would start with the statutory language, and that is the requirement to maintain reasonable security measures. Reasonable security measures. So even the statute recognizes that there are limitations, there are finite resources, and business must be conducted. The only way to be truly safe is never to accept any data at all, right? So the fact that the statutes all have a reasonableness aspect to it means that there's a balancing act. So how do you, as a small business, properly balance the risk? I start with benchmarking, right? I benchmark size of company. I benchmark against the nature of the data. And I benchmark based on my position in the business ecosystem. Am I consumer facing? Am I a service provider? So I benchmark against all those things. One practice tip I would give is that you should actually not only review the legislation and the implementing regulations, I would strongly encourage all companies to look at settlement agreements. If you want to understand what the current thinking is relative to reasonable security measures, read the settlement agreements, right? Every settlement agreement of significance will have business changes and injunctive relief. You need to read those, particularly in your industry. It provides a very good roadmap and a very good response in the event of an incident. You're in a strong position if you are saying to a regulator post-incident, we read the settlement agreement from 6 months ago. We saw, regulatory agency, what you were emphasizing by way of business changes, and we made those changes, or we were in the process of making those changes. So that would be the business tip I would provide to all companies listening, and it's a frankly very inexpensive way to put yourself and your company in a strong position if there is an incident.
That's a great perspective, and I 100% agree with you, Ashley, especially when you're a small business. You really need to also prioritize where you put your resources and investment. We have yet another good questions from the audience, and Arlette, maybe I'll ask you to respond to that, and then the rest of the panelists can comment. Having seen the users side compliance have the issue of the users not caring or wanting to follow up with all the changes, which we see in security and compliance all the time, how does that affect the way you do your security procedure? Or would you ask customers to do that?
So I completely understand their perspective on that. Their objective is to accomplish the business that they're in. They are not there to secure the infrastructure. So taking as much pain away as possible is really critical to accomplishing a compliance infrastructure. Every time you're driving through we have to have identity management. It has to have value beyond, well, it doesn't have to, but it helps if it has value beyond just the security perspective. Why do we have firewalls? Because the alternative is not to have a business that works at all. So making sure that we communicate the whole story and not just, why we're doing these things. It's not just to torture our users. That's just an added benefit, right? But it's really to drive all of the enabling the business. If we don't have the right security in place, we can't get this business done. We have the legal risks of, we lose data, somebody sues us, our business is gone. We have the in the federal government, you can't maintain your ATO. You end up with a lot more pain as you don't do the compliance in an ongoing way. I haven't patched for 10 years. It's a lot more painful to patch after 10 years than it would have been to do it ongoing all the way through the process. And so just adding the benefit and selling the security is not just for its own sake, it's really to enable business. It's a hard challenge, but and getting closer to the DevSecOps kind of approach and making sure that you really are with the people who are doing the development too. So it's all an integrated whole picture. Those are the pieces that really get important from my perspective.
Definitely, and I would say also constant education. A lot of times, as you said, people don't know why we are asking them to do things. So just having a really good learning path for them to understand in why they're being asked and what are the risks, always also super helpful. Ashley, because I know you're coming from the background and the work you're doing on post-incident. Obviously, as security and compliance professionals, our goal is to prevent as much as we can, but we know also at the end of the day, with security and compliance, it's not the matter of when you're going to have incident or the breach, it's just a matter of when. So walk us through a couple of examples of how you help your customers after the fact to go back to normal, and then what are the processes you help them put in place to minimize the risk in the future?
So two immediate thoughts come to mind. The first is that, and this is difficult for many companies post-incident, that is, when you have a significant incident as a company, it is transformational. It is forced change. And I start every representation by advising companies of that. You have to embrace the fact that this is going to be a transformational event, right? The relationship between the general counsel's office and the business will fundamentally change, and it will need to change because post-incident, we're going to have audit and reporting responsibilities. So I start by encouraging companies to understand that basic notion. The other thing I say is that you can't, because of what you said, that it's not a matter of if, but when, there is a defensiveness that's natural for companies that I encourage people not to have, right? There is, you need to understand that the defensiveness is something that doesn't work for you. You could do everything right and still have an incident, right? And so that's the second thing I tell companies in terms of how to really get through this, is to not be defensive. Let us demonstrate that you engaged in best efforts, and everyone in this business understands that this is an evolving process. And so I offer those 2 points at the beginning of every representation.
Thank you so much, Ashley. Thank you so much for the rest of the panelists. I wish we had another 30 minutes to continue this conversation. I know the audience were also very interactive. Thanks for your questions. I am happy to be here, and I also say from all the panelists, we all appreciate your time, you listening. Reach out to us, add us on LinkedIn, and we are happy to answer any questions offline as well. And with that, I'm going to pass it on to our great host, Elizabeth.